Hello and welcome to the Real Estate Photography Podcast. My name is Drew Zink. In today's episode, I'd like to continue on the thought process of how I shoot and get my final images through exposure fusion. And today, I'd like to touch upon flash, because in each one of my shots that I take to get my exposure fusion, each one of the bracketed images, I use fill flash. And the reason I use fill flash is because I like to shoot towards windows. And the reason I like to shoot towards windows is because they, especially in rooms like bedrooms and living rooms, where the room is primarily made up of furniture, the furniture is more than the times than not going to be leaving. So the room isn't necessarily about the furniture. It is about the permanent features. And one of those permanent features that people really like to see are windows. Now, shooting at windows can cause all kinds of problems. One of the biggest ones is that on the camera side, when shooting towards windows, it can create some really deep shadows that are difficult to overcome, even through exposure fusion. So the way I mitigate this problem is through using fill flash on each one of my images that go into my bracketed set. And the main reason I use the fill flash is I want to be able to use it on especially the darkest two images, the -4 and the -2, because those images I may have to use later on in the editing process to layer in to get some information back on parts of the image that still may be blown out, even after they've been run through the exposure fusion. And if I don't have that fill flash, when I bring up the exposure to layer in the layering process later on, if I haven't used fill flash, I might not be able to get what I need. And I'll go into this later on once I get to how I edit my pictures. But just note, this is a -4 image right here. The -4 shot on a bracketed exposure. The windows, everything outside looks great right here and looks great right here. But I still have, because of my fill flash, retained some detail throughout the image for the most part. And the most important part to me where I've retained information is right over here in the window treatment, because it's a very dark window treatment compared to how bright it is outside. And I've also retained some information here in the couch, and it's a very dark couch compared to how bright it is outside. If I wouldn't have used fill flash, this information would not be here, and I wouldn't be able to recover it and use it later on. Let me give you an example. In this one, hypothetically, let's say I had some real bad blooming over here on the couch in my exposure fused image, and I had some blooming over here because of the transition from light to dark. I could use this image to blend back in later to try to stop some of that blooming. Because I've used fill flash, all I need to do is go in, bring my shadows up. You can already see some information coming out over in here and up in here, and bring up my exposure. Just like that. Now, you can tell I am getting a little bit of noise here, but that's okay, because this isn't going to make up the primary portion of the blended image when I go back and layer it in. And if I use a little bit of noise reduction, it'll take some of that out, clean it up just a little bit, and when I go back in and layer it in, it'll look real nice. But if I wouldn't have used flash, I wouldn't have all this information. And I'll put this into practice, or practical application later on when I show you how I edit all these things. But for right now, I want to talk about Flash. So the other thing I need to say is that when I use Flash, I only use manual Flash. I don't let the camera decide anything for me. And the reason I do that is because through trial and error, I have figured out what works for most settings or most situations. And there isn't a guide that I can give you that says, in this situation, use 1/8 power or 1/16 power or full power. Each situation is different, and it's one of those things that you need to use your Flash and test out. I've used an SB800, an SB900, and then on my Nikon, on the Canon side, I've used a 580EX2, and each one is slightly different on their output. And because of that, there are different settings that I have to use. So there is no foolproof method, but just know that I like to use manual because I'm in full control. Now also note that I said I really only need the Flash for the darkest 2 exposures, but the Flash does fire for the brighter 3 exposures. And the reason that is because on the promote control, it just fires everything sequentially. I have it set up for a 2-second delay in between each exposure, which would be enough time for me to turn the Flash off for the last 3, but I don't want to touch the camera and move anything out of alignment. I'm much better off just letting the Flash fire for those 3 exposures as well than me bump the camera and have to do the whole thing over again, or not realize that I bumped the camera and move things out of alignment and then have a lot of problems when I get back home. So if you have any questions about how I use PhilFlash and why I use PhilFlash, please hit me up in the comments. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have. That's it for now. I look forward to the next time.